Hi everyone, welcome to the first ever episode of Wasted. I'm Sarah Waters.
And I'm Eartha Britt.
And we're the hosts of Wasted, a podcast where we rummage through the seedy world of waste to uncover trash, treasure, and truth.
Every month we'll cast a light on the dark truths surrounding topics of water, waste, and the environment. Together we'll expose what we're all doing wrong and challenge you into changing your sordid ways.
Now Britt, I have to tell you, researching this story had me terrified. I'm someone who believes in the supernatural, and I always have. Not that I've ever experienced anything myself, but even as a child, I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. And I have to say that part of me had always kind of hoped that I might experience a visit from something beyond this dimension. But after this investigation, it is safe to say that this is something I don't ever want to experience.
Oh, you're giving me chills already.
Oh, you're telling me. Today, we're going to reveal the disturbing truth behind one of the most haunting true stories. So stay tuned for today's episode, Annabelle's Return. In the early 1940s, two parents, whose names are unknown, welcomed a beautiful baby girl into their life. They named her Janice. Janice was described as a sweet and trusting young girl. She cared for her friends and family, she was energetic, and every once in a while she'd get into the typical mischief that you would expect from anyone at that age.
Now, there isn't a lot of information on Janice's life with her birth parents. But we do know that in the 1950s, she developed polio, and shortly thereafter, she was placed in an orphanage run by a Romanian nun, Sister Charlotte. Unfortunately, the orphanage closed its doors, so Sister Charlotte had to find an alternative accommodations for herself and her orphaned girls. Enter Samuel and Esther Mullins.
Now let's take a step back here for a second and learn just a little bit more about this couple. So in 1939, Samuel and Esther had a daughter of their own, Annabelle. When Annabelle was only 7 years old, the Mullins suffered a tragic loss when she was struck by a vehicle. Sadly, she didn't survive. Shortly after, the Mullins started experiencing some strange activity around their home. They would hear childlike giggling, the pitter-patter of feet, and they would see Annabelle's toys out as if somebody was playing with them. They kind of suspected that it was the spirit of their daughter. Samuel and Esther, understandably, were desperate to stay connected to their daughter, so they enlisted the help of a medium to invite the spirit into their home and inhabit the body of their daughter's favorite toy, a Raggedy Ann doll. You can imagine how that turned out. It wasn't long after that they thought the spirit inhabiting the doll might not be that of their Annabelle, but something much more sinister. They tried countless times to dispose of the doll. They put it in the garbage, they tossed it down a well, they even buried it. But the doll would always find its way back into their home. With nowhere else to turn, they locked the doll in a closet in Annabelle's room, where no one was permitted to enter, not even the Mullins themselves. Years later, though, the Mullins still felt that void, and this is what led them to open their home to Sister Charlotte and her girls who were left without a home when the orphanage closed its doors.
Now, remember when we introduced Janice earlier and mentioned that as sweet and trusting as she was, she also had a mischievous side? What I meant is that she tended to disobey orders, and the one order she disobeyed that would go on to change the lives of countless individuals and families was entering Annabelle's room against the request of the Mullins.
So one fateful night, after everyone was sound asleep, Janice entered the forbidden room that belonged to the Mullins' late daughter, Annabelle. In there, she found a key that unlocked the closet door, and in that closet, she found the Raggedy Ann doll, the same doll that was inhabited by a spirit thought to be that of Annabelle. And once that door was open, the spirit was unleashed. Now, free from the confines of that closet, the spirit began to terrorize Janice. After several harrowing occurrences, it nearly took possession of her. No one knows exactly what happened that night, but by the morning, the house was completely empty. Sister Charlotte and the girls, Janice included, had fled the home. Samuel and Esther left without a trace, their whereabouts still unknown to this day. And the Raggedy Ann doll? It also disappeared. and it would take nearly 30 years before anyone would come across it again.
Aquaterra is a full-service utility corporation, the provider of choice for governments, businesses, and communities. Our business is to provide high-quality utility service and optimize value to consumers, the environment, and shareholders.
Aquaterra and the City of Grand Prairie are excited to bring you Drop and Swap, a free community event to kick off Waste Reduction Week, October 21st to 27th. If you have new or gently used clothing, even Halloween costumes, you can drop them off to the Muscosipi Park Pavilion this Friday between noon and 8 p.m. Then check out the swap on Saturday from 12 to 4. You don't need to drop off clothing to participate, but don't forget your reusable bags. Swap till you drop. Leave what you can, take what you need.
Donna was a 28-year-old nursing student living in Connecticut in an apartment with her best friend Angie, also a nursing student, and Angie's fiancé Lou. We'll learn more about Lou here shortly. Donna and Angie were your typical 20-something college students. They took their studies seriously, but they also liked to have a little fun. If they weren't in class or studying, you could find them at a local mall, taking in a show at the theater, or catching up with their friends at a local watering hole. As emblematic as this is for college students, there was one atypical difference between Donna and her roommates, which we'll learn was to their detriment. Donna was a collector, specifically a doll collector.
In 1970, Donna was coming up on her 28th birthday, and her mom wanted to get her something very special to add to her collection. She scoured hobby stores, thrift shops, and specialty stores to find the perfect addition, finally coming across a little antique shop tucked away in the town square. It was here that she found a doll unlike any other in Donna's collection, featuring button eyes, a triangle nose, and red hair made of yarn. It was a Raggedy Ann doll, named Annabelle. Within 2 weeks of bringing Annabelle home, Donna, Angie, and Lou began to notice some strange movement around the house. Things began subtly at first, almost unnoticeable. Donna would come home and find the doll in a slightly different position than she had left her, or she would find small items around the house had been moved to a different location, things that could be explained. But over time, these movements became much more apparent. Donna would discover the doll in a completely different room than she had left her in. Sometimes, she would find her with her legs crossed and her arms folded. And once, she found her standing on her feet in the dining room. One day, Donna came home and found pieces of parchment paper strewn around the house with messages written in childlike handwriting. The messages read, "Help," and "Not leaving." What's most frightening about this is that they didn't even have parchment paper in their home. And it was after this occurrence that Donna decided to enlist the help of a medium.
The medium held a seance and introduced Donna, Angie, and Lou to the spirit of a 7-year-old girl, Annabelle. Now remember when we learned that the Mullins lost their daughter after being struck by a vehicle? It turns out that this happened on the very road where the apartment complex Donna, Angie, and Lou lived in now stood. Out of compassion, Donna and Angie permitted the spirit of Annabelle to possess the doll and stay with them. Lou, on the other hand, was reluctant. From the very beginning, he tried everything in his power to convince the girls to get rid of it. He was certain that the doll possessed a negative energy and he didn't want to be around it. As time went on, Lou tried countless times to dispose of the doll. Just like prior attempts made by the Mullins, the doll kept coming back.
One day, Lou and Angie were preparing for a trip that they were embarking on the next day, and they heard a rustling noise coming from Donna's room. Lou approached the door, waiting for the noises to stop, and when they did, he entered the room and he saw Annabelle laying on the floor. As he walked over to her, he sensed that something was behind him, but when he spun around, no one was there. Moments later, he was doubled over, laying on the ground, clutching his chest. When he looked down, he saw that he had 7 claw-like scratches on his chest. Within days, these scratches had completely disappeared. However, Lou began to exhibit some unusual behavior. He became disruptive, short-tempered and abrasive when asked questions, and he got violently ill. But what stood out the most was when Lou began speaking in languages that he'd never spoken in before.
After this incident, Donna came to the realization that Lou's behavior was connected to Annabelle, and that they could no longer remain in possession of this doll. Immediately, she contacted her priest, Father Cook, who got in touch with the world-renowned paranormal researchers Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens were well versed in paranormal activity, having worked on cases such as the infamous Amityville case and the Perron family case that was later chronicled in the movie The Conjuring. When they arrived, they were instantly drawn to Lou and sensed an overpowering presence trying to take hold of him. The presence was strong, but Ed and Lorraine knew that if they could separate Lou and Annabelle before Annabelle had completely possessed him, then Lou would be safe and no longer tormented by her. At Donna's request, Ed and Lorraine took custody of Annabelle and moved her to their home in Connecticut. With the doll out of their apartment, this strange and unexplainable happening stopped, at least for Donna, Angie, and Lou.
Back in Connecticut, Ed and Lorraine, who were no strangers to these types of activities, began to experience similar events. As before, it started out subtly, a slight shift in the doll's position, the movement of small items around the house. But the very last straw for them was when they came home to find messages scrawled not only on pieces of paper around their home, but also on their walls. Messages that said, "Not leaving," and "Don't go." Even this got to be too much for the Warrens, and they too decided to enlist the help of the local medium, and you would not believe how the story unfolded. Aquaterra Utilities is the Grand Prairie region's provider of water, wastewater, and solid waste services. Its core purpose is growing healthy communities and aims to have the best people providing the best service for the best value.
Wondering what to do with your pumpkins after Halloween? Place them in clear plastic bags for curbside collection with your yard waste. After you're done with your spooky Halloween jack-o'-lanterns, we'll use them for our bioreactor. Organics, such as pumpkins, quickly decompose, which produces methane gas. We then convert it into a fuel source to heat and power our treatment plants. For more information, visit our Facebook page or aquaterra.ca. Water, Earth, Innovation, Aquaterra.
According to the medium obtained by the Warrens, Annabelle wasn't ready to leave this world. After she passed, her spirit was still very much alive. The more she fought to stay in this realm, the more powerful she became, until one day she garnered the strength to take possession of her favorite doll, the Raggedy Ann doll that sat untouched in her room.
Having taken possession of this doll, Annabelle was now able to behave as she did as a child. She could run around her house and play hide-and-seek with her parents. She could play with all her toys. She could write notes for her friends and family to find, just to show them that she was still there. Shortly after inhabiting the doll, Annabelle's parents became frightened, which led them to many attempts to dispose of her. But she always found her way back, which frightened her parents even more, leading them to encase her in a closet in their daughter's room. At that moment, Annabelle realized that because she was a doll, she was disposable. Even though she was young and had a lot of life left in her that could have been enjoyed by someone else, it was much easier to throw her away than to donate her or find a new purpose for her. When she came to this understanding, she decided that the only way she could be saved from unnecessary disposal was to become something that people saw as much more valuable. She needed to become a person.
This is what led Annabelle to try to possess Janice when she arrived and opened that closet door. It's what led her to attempt to possess Lou after being gifted to Donna. And it's what led her to leave those messages once she had arrived at Ed and Lorraine Warren's home in Connecticut. She wasn't trying to scare anyone, she was trying to communicate with anyone who would listen that she didn't want to be locked away, buried, or discarded. That she may have been someone's trash, but she could have been someone's treasure. And when that didn't work, she didn't know what to do, except to try to become someone else. The moral of today's story is this. Everyone has an ethical and social responsibility to our environment. You may be finished with an item, but that doesn't mean that the life of that item needs to stop with you. Everyday items, like this doll, can be donated or repurposed into something special. So the next time you think about throwing something away, I encourage you to think again. You never know what might come back to haunt you.